For me to say that I'm a trans person means that I'm a person who was assigned a certain sex at birth, and it would be assumed that I have an identity that we'll say is very similar / matches that sex. So because for someone like me, who was assigned male at birth on the basis of my body, it's assumed that I'm going to identify as a male and most likely have a more masculine form of expression. But that expectation doesn't cut for trans people, in that people may have a feminine expression, they may have a non-binary expression, they may decide not to use any label at all, and in terms of identity, similar, they may identify as female or something other than male or female. So it's a broad sort of umbrella term covering a whole range of situations of trans and gender diversity. There's usually 3 or 4, or say 48 font headings of trans rights abuses and shortcomings in terms of trans people. In no particular order, there's issues of documentation, in that trans and gender diverse people may not be able to get documentation that matches their sense of affirmed identity, or whilst they may be able to have some progress, it may be designated on a surgical basis rather than just a sense of self. And that can lead to all sorts of issues in terms of opening bank accounts, in some places in terms of airline flights, for young people going for the school holiday job. If they're required to produce a birth certificate, currently in Victoria at this time, under 18s can't change, for those born in Victoria, they can't change their birth certificates at all. The second big heading is discrimination in terms of employment, provision of goods and services, memberships of organisations. The third area is health and medical care, the out-of-pocket costs for trans people needing surgery. For a trans woman, $15,000 Australian to have that surgery here. For trans men, more if there are multiple surgeries involved. A critical form of on-the-ground discrimination and social discrimination is that we have a shortage of health professionals who are knowledgeable and sensitive towards trans people in 2 aspects, whether it's a trans-related issue such as coming out or administering hormones, but often it's the other way around, where someone, say, goes to a doctor for a sprained ankle and then gets asked all about transgender issues, which wastes their time. The fourth area for trans people is lack of funding for trans organisations, both in terms of advocacy and education, which could prevent a lot of these issues, and also in terms of social and support. Within Australia, apart from the New South Wales Gender Centre and to some extent the ACT Gender Centre, there is virtually no funded support apart from the occasional project funding for trans and gender diverse people. And another area that would be helpful is research. While we've had some progress in that area, we need more research on what I'll call the diversity within the diversity. So things such as trans people from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds, trans people who work in the sex industry, more research both qualitative and quantitative. So there's a lot of issues to cover. Reforms needed for the Victorian Equal Opportunity Act would be to update the current definition of gender identity to that came into federal law in August 2013, and that's an all-inclusive law covering the whole trans and gender diverse kaleidoscope, including those identities other than male or female, and also is a very simple law. It's concise and effective. It doesn't tie people to their assigned sex at birth. And whilst not a trans issue, we would also like to see the definition of intersex added to Victorian law, the same as came into federal law in 2013. There are also other laws beyond equal opportunity law, such as changing birth certificates to be based on affirmed identity, and also for under 18s to have the ability to change their birth certificate with the support of at least one parent or guardian, and also to have more options than male or female. So there needs to be a lot of catching up. We've found that only in the last few weeks at the time as we're having this conversation that more and more young people are identifying as other than male or female. They're not taking a medical path. it'll be real, this is only going to keep happening, so we need to sort of get with the program now, to be honest. We'd like to see, in relation to training of health and medical professionals, there's two areas. There needs to be a comprehensive inclusion of trans, and for that matter intersex, gay, lesbian and bisexual, in medical training of all sorts, whether it's GPs, psychologists, not just the sort of tucking an hour into a corner in a hurry. That sort of isolates it and others people, which isn't what we want. But also there needs to be training for existing professionals. Sadly, we have too many reports of people coming out to health professionals and getting reactions from, well, we'll say the least worst of, oh, I don't know about that, to things like, oh, you don't want to do that, you wouldn't know about that, that's a stupid thing to do, or worse. So we need to have a situation that trains existing health professionals, such as a 15 to 20 minute online module. We understand health professionals are really busy people. We think that could give the basics a go, and then if people wanted more training, they could contact organisations like TransGender Victoria or the New South Wales Gender Centre for a more detailed session in smaller numbers. Trans people get excluded from activities like sport, in that the current definition at both the Victorian and federal level, and in most other states and territories, but thankfully not all, is that we're limited on the basis of strength, stamina or physique from competitive sporting activity, but it's not clearly stated that it has to be on the basis of strength, stamina or physique. So often we find trans people just being excluded because they're trans, and also there's no legal definition that I've found yet of what competitive means. As someone who used to play golf, does that mean the PGA Tour? Does it mean a pennant championship? Does it mean an amateur high-level championship? What does it mean? And that's led to some ludicrous situations, such as a trans woman who affirmed her identity and was told she could play as a woman in a scratch round at the local golf club, but couldn't play as a woman in a pennant championship because that was deemed to be competitive. So there's laws that are really based on some very stereotypical ideas about body and identity and expression that need to be brought into 2014 and beyond.